An 1888 signal service ledger, browned with paste ink, records a 48-foot drift bowing the 42nd Street reservoir door once thought unyielding. Salt-crusted gloves still ghost the page. If this stirs you, please subscribe. If this whisper of buried cold steadies you, please subscribe. Your quiet support keeps these midnights unfolding. Under a gas mantle in Washington Square, telegraph custodian Lila Thatcher warmed her palms above a brazier while feeling the static prickle through wool sleeves, the copper key on her desk iced into silence as twilight deepened to indigo. She checked the relay screws by touch, fingertips grazing frost, listening for the faint click that meant Brooklyn still spoke across the span. Instead, only the wind answered, slapping the shutters and rattling the chain of the wall clock whose pendulum stalled. She unrolled gauze bandages to wrap her instrument, an odd tenderness directed toward a machine that usually chirped orders through midnight. Outside, sleigh runners hissed, proving that motion had downgraded itself to a whisper. She leaned against a beam sticky with condensed breath, thinking of the ledger's towering drift, wondering if it truly pinned the city's chest. The silence tightened. Obedience to the myth of ceaseless chatter had been severed. Did she imagine the first crackle returning, or did she fear what new command might ride it? Signal Service Lieutenant Everett Ransom climbed the narrow stairs of the Equitable Building on March 11, 1888, barometer case banging against his hip, the leather perfumed with tallow and cold brass. He had been ordered to recalibrate the rooftop aneroid since the mercury tube in the lobby fractured like brittle sugar. Up top, sleep gnawed through 2 layers of oilskin, yet he focused on the dial, 2920 inches and falling, the needle trembling in pale lamplight, proving the cyclone's backbone had not yet snapped. He jotted the reading in a pocket diary already damp, ink feathers blooming as the gale chewed at his boots. The city's legend of perpetual motion fluttered below. A web of streetcars halted, horses snorting clouds. Ransom shivered, not from cold but from the ledger echoing in his mind, and his own role in trapping Manhattan's collapse in numerals. Could a measured fall of pressure ever persuade citizens that even their relentless avenues could freeze into a museum of snow? 24-year-old seamstress Marta Velasquez, newly arrived from Ponce, cupped her hands around a tin mug in the immigrant boarding house on East 10th, the coffee smelling of burnt chicory and hope. As neighbors pressed against the stove, they had been told the city never faltered, yet the landlord filed into the parlor with a shovel crusted in hoarfrost, announcing the door to the counting room was barricaded by a drift higher than his shoulders. Marta stitched gauze onto coats by candlelight, needle flashing like a tiny aurora, the wax scent mingling with damp wool and the faint tang of hot iron from the laundry. The myth evaporated as quickly as her breath. Outside, she glimpsed lamplighters groping upward with poles that clanged against glass already iced opaque. The measured drift from the ledger took form in the piled whiteness pressing the panes. She swallowed, wondering if the city's pride would thaw by morning or if silence would keep rolling like a heavy fabric bolt. On the Brooklyn Bridge cable room floor, engineer Charles Roebling Jr. inspected strain gauges, their brass faces fogged, while the cables thrummed like distant drums under sleet. He traced the rivulets freezing along the wires, feeling the grainy crust, as assistants wiped lenses on flannel cloths that smelled faintly of whale oil. The instruments showed oscillations beyond safe tolerance, numbers flickering between green and amber, suggesting the span should close. Yet closing meant admitting that the city's arteries could falter, and civic officials balked. Roebling wrote in his log, "Deflection 11 inches under gust," the script tight. He remembered the ledger's drift, the number pinned in history, and he felt compelled to add, "Heave audible, recommend evacuation." Sound, measurement, pride, a braid tightening. Did he believe anyone would heed it before the cables sang a warning too late? A midtown seam of telegraph wire sagged onto icy cobbles, and lineman Jonah Baxter, cheeks raw, hauled it skyward with tar-stiff gloves, aware the static tasted metallic on his tongue. The wire groaned, proving the weight of rhyme outmatched his strength, so he called to passers-by who only stared from muffled scarves, their breaths ghosting through lamplight yellow as buttermilk. He smelled horse sweat congealing in frost as animals refused to budge. The ledger drift haunted him. If 48 feet of snow could cage a doorway, what chance did a single man have against a frozen skyline? He wedged the wire against a chimney, listening to the faint hum return. The city's pulse reviving momentarily through his fingers. The iron breathes in the hush. Snow hushes under old beams. Windows listen for forgotten whistles. Jonah wondered whether the myth of unstoppable motion would snap louder than the wire should it fall again. Weather historian Harriet Glynn, writing in 1915, discovered Ransom's diary wedged inside a signal service crate stored under moth-eaten blankets at the Park Row Archive. The room smelled of mildew and old sepia glue, sunlight filtered by dust motes that drifted like slow snow. She noted the pressure readings, the margins stained with salt from the lieutenant's gloves, and she compared them to Central Park Observatory logs, proving the collapse in pressure aligned with the moment elevated trains froze in place. Her pencil traced a path across maps spread on a scarred oak table, the grain rough under her palm. She paused, eyes closed, hearing the faint echo of sleigh bells from a recording cylinder she had spun earlier. Would the myth of the city that never slept surrender now that she held such concordant numbers, or would publishers prefer the legend to sell papers? Silence, she realized, sometimes came from editors fearing readers' faith would crack. Archivist Thomas Leary, tasked in 1932 with cataloguing insurance damage claims from 1888, opened a ledger whose spine creaked like a winter stare. Inside, the inked accounts smelled faintly of coal soot, each line describing roof collapses, frozen hydrants, and warehouses entombed by snow welded to brick. He brushed soot flakes from the page, fingers gritty. The discovery felt like a loyal echo of the original drift measurement, reinforcing that the city's unstoppable fable had cost real shingles, real beams. He copied numbers onto transparent cellulose sheets under a swing arm lamp glowing soft amber, the hum of the building's new electrics counterpoint to the scratch of his pen. Did he dare argue that prideful silence about the losses had kept building codes weak for decades? His supervisor preferred the whisper that New York endured without complaint, so Thomas filed the sheet quietly, suppression born of institutional caution rather than malice. Across the Hudson in Hoboken's Lackawanna terminal, ferry stewardess Elise Dubois kept watch on March 12 as ice floes slammed wooden pilings where rope smelled of brine and tar. The ferry horn, ordinarily brazen, moaned like a distant cello, and the deck vibrated beneath boots slick with sleet. She measured the delay, 3 ferries immobilized by pack ice, passengers huddled near portable stoves whose embers snapped. She cradled a pocket watch, feeling its chill through gloves, noting that the unstoppable city was now reachable only through cracking ice. The ledger's driftweight pulsed in her memory from newspapers she'd hoarded, and she jotted in a personal log the precise hour the Hudson surrendered to stillness. Would anyone believe a stewardess if she declared the metropolis marooned? Awe, not fear, kept her quiet. The frozen expanse gleamed like tin, and she sensed the river demanding reverent silence. In 1948, Columbia University meteorology student Rajesh Patel threaded microfilm into a reader. The machine's whir, a soft mechanical sigh, to analyze the 1888 storm reports. The laboratory smelled of ozone and chalk. He compared thermograph traces, their blackened loops revealing the temperature's plunge from 33 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit within 6 hours, proving the atmospheric cliff by measured ink arcs. He pressed fingertips against the glass, feeling minute warmth from the bulb beneath. Outside, the city roared as if the myth had resurrected, taxis honking. Rajesh drafted a paper pointing out the storm's rapid cyclogenesis and warning that such a collapse could happen again if energy patterns aligned. The department chair advised restraint. Alumni disliked tales that made New York vulnerable. Simple career caution silenced Rajesh's stronger language, yet he kept a copy folded in his notebook, numerical proof flickering like a coal ember awaiting air. Historian Noriko Sato in 1961 interviewed elderly Greenwich Village resident Beatrice Lowell, whose childhood memory of the blizzard anchored in smell and sound. Beatrice recalled the scent of wet straw laid across sidewalks to prevent slips, mingling with the spice of boiled turnips from communal soup pots. Noriko's tape recorder clicked softly on the cafe table, the reels turning in hypnotic rhythm as rain streaked the window, proving weather still paced the city's heart. Beatrice described snow grates sealed by ice so resonant that boys tapped them with broom handles, making frozen bells toll under starlight dimmed by coal smoke. Noriko linked each recollection to documented measurements, threading fact with sensation, centering the ledger's drift as emblematic of the night the city's myth fell quiet. Would future listeners taste the turnip soup on her words and accept the vulnerability? Or would nostalgia dilute the truth into cozy legend? Analog climatologist Henrik Weiss, working in 1973 for the nascent National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, compared the 1888 synoptic charts with satellite imagery from contemporary nor'easters. His office smelled of mimeograph fluid and warmed plastic. Spreading translucent overlays across a light table, he traced isobars-like contours of a sleeping giant drowning Manhattan. The 29.0-inch depressed pressure center aligned precisely with the time the 6th Avenue elevated froze, proving the instrumentation had been reliable despite crude sheltering. He rubbed tired eyes, the light table humming faintly, and highlighted the ledger drift as a footnote in his report. Budget priorities shifted toward hurricane research, and his supervisor nudged him to shelve the submission. The silence this time stemmed from bureaucratic triage. Henrik stored the overlays rolled inside a cardboard tube, the plastic edges rasping against the cylinder, hopeful that another era would uncap the data. Photographer Aletta Monroe in 1983 unearthed glass negatives of the blizzard in a Brooklyn attic, their sleeves coated with fine plaster dust that tasted chalky on her lips. Holding one against a lightbox, she saw a lamplit street metamorphosed into frozen dunes, a carriage half swallowed, the snow texture like carved alabaster. She catalogued each image with meticulous notes, location, exposure time, lens aperture, correlating them with sanitation department logs that documented 14,000 men hired to shovel. The unstoppable city myth dissolved in her mind, replaced by the tangible slump of overwhelmed shoulders. Gallery owners, craving spectacle, urged her to exhibit them as backdrops for fashion rather than history, an invitation she declined, choosing to keep the story anchored in measured hardship. Did the negatives murmur thanks when she rewrapped them in acid-free paper, scented faintly of cedar, ready for a future that might honor their truth? Mariner-turned-librarian Gideon Hoos in 1991 catalogued sailors' letters describing the blizzard's grip on harbor traffic. The reading room smelled of beeswax polish, and sunlight warmed the table where he spread brittle sheets. One letter recorded the bark Evelyn locked in the East River ice, the crew sawing channels through a crust a foot thick. The rasp of steel echoed in Gideon's memory. He cross-referenced the report with Coast Guard logs that clocked wind gusts at 85 miles per hour near Sandy Hook, proving the storm's ferocity beyond hearsay. He whispered the ledger's drift figure under his breath like a compass bearing, aligning stories to the number that first shattered myth. Out of respect for sailors who perished from exposure, he refrained from dramatizing their words, reverence guiding his silence. Would visitors someday sense the cold that clung to the ink, or would these letters remain just curiosities tucked in acid boxes? In 1996, subway mechanic Imani Okafor, assigned to the Transit Museum's restoration project, found schematics marked March 1888 emergency vent plan, hidden behind a rusted locker. The paper smelled of machine oil and damp cardboard. She spread it on a workbench beneath flickering fluorescent light, tracing diagrams of hatchways pried open with crowbars to relieve smoke when snow blocked ventilation. The legend of unstoppable transit faltered in each annotation, in the graphite smudges that described crews digging barehanded to reach trapped trains. She compared the plan to modern protocols, highlighting lessons in a report typed with grease-streaked fingers. Management appreciated the history, but tucked the document into an internal archive, citing that publicizing past failures might undermine confidence. Suppression came from fear of unsettling riders. Imani copied the plan into her notebook, the pencil squeaking softly, determined to remember how the city once admitted defeat to a snowdrift towering near 50 feet. Climate journalist Matteo Ruiz in 2003 filmed an interview with great-granddaughter of Lila Thatcher, the telegraph custodian, inside a parlour heavy with lavender polish scent. The camera's red light glowed like an ember, while rain tapped the windows, mirroring the old sleet's percussion. The descendant produced the brazier, still bearing soot-laced edges, and Matteo filmed gloved fingers tracing its rim. He intercut the footage with scans of the ledger drift, building a narrative tying tactile evidence to the crushing of the city's myth. The network, chasing sensational present-day storms, aired only snippets, trimming the historic depth. Commercial timing silenced the full account, an accident of programming. Matteo archived the full video on a labelled mini DV tape that clicked as it locked into its case, promising himself the measured truth would one day thaw. Historian Leila Markovic in 2008 led an overnight walk through Manhattan, tracing the blizzard's route. Participants wearing headphones that emitted wind recordings captured from restored cylinders, the sound a haunting hiss. She paused at the old 42nd Street Reservoir site, now Bryant Park, where the ledger's drift had formed. Holding a laser thermometer, she demonstrated how modern stone retained chill after sundown, linking to 1888's granite bulwark. The group touched the marble balustrade, fingers absorbing residual coolness. Leila's narration blended exact times, snowfall beginning 5:30 a.m. March 12, with reflections on the myth of unceasing movement, suggesting that the city's heartbeat once paused like a sleeper between breaths. The walk ended without signage. She favoured transient knowledge over monuments. Did the participants carry the sensory proof home, or would the fragrance of hot pretzels from nearby vendors eclipse the past by morning? Archivist couple Simone and Lars Peterson travelled in 2012 to the Smithsonian's off-site storage to digitise the 1888 snow gauges. The warehouse smelled of corrugated cardboard and chilled aluminum. They lifted a copper gauge dented near the rim, likely from a shovel stroke, and recorded its dimensions. 8 inches across, 12 deep under LED fluorescence that hummed softly. Each photograph captured scratches where ice once gnawed, the metallic taste lingering on Simone's breath as she leaned close. They matched serial numbers to Signal Service inventory, linking the instrument directly to Lieutenant Ransom's log. Uploading the images, they mused on the city's myth, shaken again by tangible metal. A server crash wiped the initial batch, an accidental digital silence. They patiently rescanned, refusing to let the rediscovery vanish, the keys clicking gently as they annotated metadata with meticulous care. Museologist Carla Inoue curated a 2014 exhibition titled Frozen Grid at the Museum of the City of New York, centering on artifacts from the blizzard. The gallery smelled of freshly painted walls and linen-covered vitrine pads. She arranged a sequence. The ledger page enlarged behind protective glass, the brazier, the copper gauge, and a reconstructed telegraph key resting on velvet. Soft blue lighting bathed the room, and a hidden speaker emitted distant wind layered with trolleybell recordings. Visitors traced fingers along the glass, yearning to feel the textures described. Carla's catalogue essay cited precise snowfall rates, 3 inches per hour at peak, and reflected on the myth's fracture, asking if vulnerability made the city more human. Her rhetorical question lingered like condensation. Attendance was modest, reverence, not fanfare, kept the space hushed, a gentle silence chosen to honour those who endured. Meteorological modeller Jae Hyun Kim in 2016 input the 1888 data into a modern ensemble system, the lab filled with the aroma of brewed barley tea. Neon monitors cast jade light on his hands as he typed wind vectors, pressure readings, and sea surface temperatures gleaned from ship logs. The simulation produced swirling violet patterns showing explosive cytogenesis south of Long Island, correlating exactly with the ledger's drift location. He compared the output to recent storms, reflecting on how the city's resilience now depended on acknowledging its past fragility. A thunderstorm cracked outside, and he smiled at the symmetry. He submitted his findings to a peer-reviewed journal, which published them quietly, the discovery neither suppressed nor trumpeted, simply folded into the academic hum. Silence held because the storm's lesson felt too tender to sensationalize. Bronx community historian Maria Delgado in 2017 organized elders to share inherited blizzard tales at a senior center smelling of talcum powder and simmered beans. Each speaker held an object, a crocheted scarf stiff with old starch, a tarnished ferry token, an iron lantern. Maria recorded oral histories with a digital mic wrapped in a wool sock to dampen echoes. She cross-checked each recollection with ward ledgers describing snow removal budgets, verifying that the unstoppable city narrative masked how neighborhoods rallied themselves. The ledger drift story surfaced repeatedly. The elders called it the White Wall. Maria wondered aloud in a single gentle question whether acknowledging that wall might help communities prepare for new storms. Applause rustled like leaves, and respect for ancestors, not fear, kept attendees from shouting. The session ended with quiet tea, steam fogging the room, honoring the past with warmth. Archaeologist Devendra Singh, in 2018, led a ground-penetrating radar survey of Lower Manhattan, hunting for remnants of collapsed horsecar tracks from 1888. The device emitted beeps and pulsed vibrations through his gloves, while the street smelled of diesel and roasted chestnuts. The radar revealed anomalies beneath East 23rd Street, shapes aligning with photographs of snow-buried rails. He coordinated with city archivists to match the signatures to emergency repair orders dated March 15, numbers crisp even after a century. The unstoppable city myth faltered once more as he imagined workers hacking at ice with pickaxes, their breath frosting kerchiefs. A construction crew foreman asked if the discovery should be publicized. Devendra advised caution until verification, not to suppress, but to prevent premature disturbance. The pause in announcement stemmed from scientific rigor, a patient silence. Did the instruments hum approval, sensing their data would soon thaw into shared memory? Poet-historian Avril Mensah, in 2019, composed an audio walk named Measured Drift, overlaying recorded footsteps crunching snow onto present-day streets. The studio, perfumed with sandalwood incense, glowed with warm desk lamps. She read passages from Marta Velázquez's letters, her voice brushing gently against microphone foam, conjuring the taste of chicory coffee and the scratch of needles. Each segment paired a date or gauge reading with lyrical reflections on the city's paused heartbeat. She wove in the ledger drift as chorus, the number 48 feet repeating softly. Public radio aired the piece late at night, and listeners reported feeling the cold settle around their shoulders. No one censored her. Instead, awe prompted hushed discussions in online forums. Avril's final question asked if a city could dream of stillness without shame, a query that fluttered like moth wings in the audio's fade-out. During a 2020 blackout drill, Con Edison engineer Felix Alvarez referenced the 1888 blizzard in emergency briefings, the conference room smelling of printer toner and lemon disinfectant. He displayed charts of the storm's impact on telegraph lines, highlighting how ice weighted copper by pounds per yard. The unstoppable myth was recast as a cautionary tale. He proposed insulating upgrades inspired by lessons from the drift data. Some executives shifted uneasily, preferring narratives of modern invulnerability. Yet Felix persisted, grounding his argument in measured figures and photographs of frozen switchboards. The proposal stalled, not from active suppression but from pandemic-era budget freezes. Felix kept the slides, their blue glare lingering on his retinas, ready for a moment when the past's evidence could steer new policies. In 2021, pastry chef and amateur historian Catalina Moretti recreated bread baked during the blizzard, using diary recipes that mentioned the yeasty aroma filling relief kitchens. Her bakery, lit by Edison bulbs glowing honey gold, smelled of molasses and char. She documented each step, measuring flour in pounds, timing proofs against the original entries. Loaf rises despite frost. Customers sampled slices topped with salted butter, the crust crunching like thin ice. Catalina posted the ledger drift figure beside the display, reminding patrons that these loaves once fed a city pinned under snow. Some patrons lingered silently, moved by the tactile link, while others simply enjoyed the flavour, their quiet a form of contentment rather than denial. Did the warm crumb convince them that the unstoppable myth had always needed a kitchen's resilience? Documentary filmmaker Jamal Price in 2022 recorded ambient soundscapes at sites from the blizzard, using a binaural rig that captured the subway's rumble mingling with faint breezes. At Madison Avenue, where horses once froze mid-stride, he looped historic wind reconstructions synthesized from barograph data. The headphones pressed gently against his ears, transmitting rustling tree branches layered with distant church bells. Jamal intercut these sounds with figures: 400,000 cubic yards of snow removed, 200 fatalities, 5 miles of telegraph lines lost. He framed each statistic with a soft narrative about the city catching its breath. Streamers requested dramatic narration, yet he chose to release the piece independently, valuing the calm truth over sensationalism. Silence in mainstream channels resulted from gatekeepers seeking louder tales. Jamal accepted the hush, trusting the measured whispers to reach those ready to listen. Astrophysicist Elena Gorova, moonlighting as a historical sleuth in 2023, analysed lunar observations from March 1888 to corroborate skies reported over New York. Her observatory smelled of cold steel and coffee grounds. She digitized notes from Harvard's chronographic telescope, aligning star visibility with eyewitness accounts of auroral glows through snow clouds. The data confirmed that at 2:30 a.m. on March 13, a break in the storm revealed Arcturus shimmering, its orange light reflecting off ice crusts, proving the city's frozen dome briefly opened. Elena linked this to the ledger's drift, asserting that even the cosmos witnessed Manhattan's surrender. Her published paper garnered niche interest, neither suppressed nor shouted, but cherished among scholars who appreciated the confluence of sky and street. She asked softly whether the stars remembered that hush, a question that lingered like frost breath. City planner Donovan Reeves in 2024 presented a proposal to integrate 1888 blizzard lessons into coastal resilience policy. The ballroom smelled of recycled air and polished maple. He displayed interactive maps showing how snowbanks once walled in firehouses, pairing them with floodgate designs that could prevent similar immobilization by water. He cited precise times when rescue wagons failed. Courts reopened March 20 only after 1,037 wagons cleared routes. The unstoppable myth crumbled anew in the data's glow. Some officials nodded, others hesitated, mindful of public perception. Donovan acknowledged that historical candor might unsettle investors, yet he insisted the ledger drift was a motif of humility worth preserving. Bureaucratic inertia, not malice, delayed adoption. The projector's fan hummed, a patient reminder that plans wait for alignment. Snow removal veteran Rosa Kim, now retired, guided a virtual reality experience titled Drifts of 1888 in 2025, the VR lab scented with synthetic pine. Participants wore headsets and felt haptic feedback mimicking the resistance of pushing a shovel through packed snow. Rosa narrated the tactile struggle, referencing logbooks where crews reported blisters under wool mittens despite wrapping handles with canvas. The simulation included the measured drift towering near the old reservoir, casting a shadow coded from photographic angles. Users heard the crunch of ice under boots, the clink of horses' harness rings stiff with frost. Rosa emphasized how the unstoppable myth evaporated when every muscle burned. The experience gained quiet acclaim. Audiences left contemplative, their silence a mix of awe and empathy. Did they carry the weight of the shovel into their everyday stride? Archivist team leader Eamon Doyle in 2026 supervised the freezing of delicate blizzard documents using a vacuum chamber to halt mold, the lab cool and smelling of steel and archival foam. The ledger with the 48 drift entered the chamber, and frost crystals briefly reformed before sublimating. Eamon monitored gauges reading microns of pressure, ensuring no ink lifted. He recorded the process with a fountain pen gliding across log sheets, noting temperature at 34 degrees Celsius. The unstoppable myth shrank further under such meticulous preservation. Funding cuts threatened the program, yet a private donation arrived after an anonymous patron learned of the procedure, proving quiet belief in safeguarding truth. No suppression, only a temporary suspension of hope, quickly thawed. Community theologian Miriam Strauss in 2027 delivered a twilight sermon at an East Village synagogue, the sanctuary smelling of candle wax and old cedar. She juxtaposed the blizzard with spiritual cycles, citing diaries that described congregants trudging through waist-deep drifts to share lantern light. She referenced the measured drift as symbol of humility, aligning it with liturgical pauses. Her voice, soft over the rustle of prayer shawls, posed a single question: could surrender to nature's stillness be a form of devotion? Congregants listened, the hush respectful. Miriam's interpretation transformed the myth. Unstoppable motion became less divine than the shared silence. Awe, not suppression, kept attendees from breaking into applause during the prayerful ending. Urban ecologist Zaha El-Sayed in 2028 studied tree ring scars within Central Park, extracting cores that released damp earth scent. The rings from 1888 showed frost damage, cellular ruptures visible under microscope light that glowed blue-white. She compared the scar widths to snowfall depths, the data aligning with the ledger drift near the reservoir's edge. Her research proved that even botanical timekeepers remembered the snow wall. She published findings in an open-access journal, the PDF accompanied by photographs of the tree's textured bark. Students visiting her lab traced the ridges, feeling the rough memory under fingertips. The unstoppable myth faded as nature's testimony joined the chorus. Zara chose not to dramatize. Respect for the tree's long patience kept her tone hushed. Sculptor Idris Beaumont in 2029 carved an ice installation on Governor's Island, the blocks smelling faintly of mineral water, surfaces glistening under sun filtered through high clouds. He embedded copper wires inside, referencing telegraph lines, and shaped arches matching the ledger drift's curvature. Sensors measured melt rates, displaying temperatures on nearby screens so visitors could see numbers sliding each hour. Idris whispered to onlookers about the myth of ceaseless movement, melting like his sculpture. He asked one gentle question: would the city pause to feel history if the ice collapsed silently? The piece thawed over 3 days, leaving copper gleaming in puddles. Awe guided spectators to leave petals, their quiet gestures amplifying the narrative. Harlem librarian Tasha Nguyen in 2030 curated a tactile exhibit for the visually impaired, featuring fabrics mimicking 1888 textures, ice-rough linen, horsehair straps, knitted mitts scented with cedar oil. Visitors traced embossed sentences describing the ledger drift and the frozen elevated trains. Audio descriptions wove measured numbers with poetic reflections, the narrator's voice low and soothing. The unstoppable myth dissolved beneath fingertips, recognizing the grain of hardship. Tasha ensured each panel included a different reason. Silence had enveloped the story, editorial caution, bureaucratic delay, reverence, awe, accidents. Did the patrons detect the pattern and feel empowered to speak it aloud? Their soft murmur of appreciation was answer enough, a gentle ripple through the reading room. Maritime archaeologist Lennon Brooks, in 2031, deployed sonar near Pier 14, mapping debris from ferries halted by the blizzard. The boat's cabin smelled of diesel and kelp. Screens displayed grayscale silhouettes of hulls layered with sediment. Lennon matched coordinates to 1888 harbour logs, citing vessels trapped by flows, confirming positions with mathematical precision. He surfaced fragments of iron cleats, cold to the touch, crusted in barnacles that scraped like sandpaper against gloves. The unstoppable myth faltered underwater too. Funding agencies requested more contemporary focus, but Lennon persisted, releasing his findings amid little fanfare. Silence came from public fatigue, yet the sonar pings echoed like patient heartbeats carrying the measured truth. Archivist and perfumer Alia Grant in 2032 recreated the scents of the blizzard era, distilling essences of coal soot, pine shavings, wet wool, and chicory. Her studio glowed with dim table lamps, and glass vials clinked faintly. She paired each fragrance with archival excerpts printed on textured paper, including the ledger drift note, so visitors could inhale history. The unstoppable myth shifted as people recognized how heavy the air once felt. Aliyah asked in a whispering question whether scent might be the final key to unlocking empathy for the frozen city. Patrons lingered, breathing quietly, reverence silenced idle chatter. The project toured libraries, the aromas guiding memories. Data archivist Matteo De Luca in 2030 sets integrated the Blizzard datasets into a public blockchain ledger, the server room humming with conditioned air scented faintly of ozone. He encoded snow measurements, wind speeds, and first-hand accounts, including the famed 48 drift, ensuring immutability. The unstoppable myth now faced cryptographic permanence. Critics questioned the need, yet Matteo insisted that securing history prevented its soft erasure. The hash displayed on a sleek monitor glowed cobalt, numbers steady. The act wasn't suppression, but a shield against forgetting. Did the ledger's original ink ever imagine a digital twin locked beyond alteration? Matteo felt the weight of guardianship settle like a gentle frost on his shoulders. Sleep researcher Dr. Pilar Estevez in 2034 analysed heart rate data from listeners who drifted off to recordings about the blizzard. Her lab smelled of lavender diffusers and fresh linen. Volunteers reclined beneath blankets while the narration described wind-scouring telegraph poles, the rhythm of snow removal crews, the legend cracking under measurements. Pilar observed that recounting precise figures such as the drift height slowed breath rates, proving that factual anchors soothed anxieties. She published results suggesting that grounded history calmed nocturnal minds better than vague myths. The unstoppable narrative lost ground in bedroom sanctuaries. Media headlines barely noticed, yet insomniacs wrote her letters thick with gratitude, or muted louder publicity. One letter asked quietly if the city's pores could teach modern bodies to rest. Genealogist Omar Haddad in 2035 assembled a digital family tree connecting descendants of those who braved the storm. His office, cozy with dust and citrus wood polish, housed rows of humming scanners. He digitized marriage certificates stained by melted snow, the paper edges curling under his gentle touch. He overlaid census data with snowfall maps, noting which families relocated after roofs caved in. Omar highlighted the ledger drift as a pivot, marking the moment ancestors chose survival over pride. Privacy concerns restricted public release of some branches. Respect for living relatives kept certain names sealed. Silence served compassion. Did the families feel the cold breath of 1888 through his messages? Replies flooded in, grateful and hushed. Composer Lian Chen in 2036 debuted 48 Feet, a chamber piece blending strings with recorded wind, performed in a hall smelling of varnished maple and rosin. She translated snowfall measurements into note durations, the ledger drift manifesting as a prolonged cello tremor. The audience sat enveloped by sound resembling snowflakes brushing cheeks, the unstoppable city myth replaced by a symphony of stillness. Applause erupted only after a long pause, or commanding silence. The piece travelled globally, carrying the factual spine of the storm wherever it played. Lian asked softly during a backstage interview if music could hold history steadier than archives, her question hanging like breath in cold air. VR archivist Julian Ocampo in 2037 expanded Rosa Kim's earlier simulation, incorporating scent diffusers and temperature shifts. The room cooled to near freezing, smelling of pine tar and ozone, as participants trudged through rendered streets where the ledger's drift towered realistically. Haptic boots crunched, and measured wind speeds blasted gently, proving that data could become multisensory. The unstoppable myth collapsed under digital immersion. Some users emerged with tears, choosing silence to process rather than to suppress. Julian logged feedback on a tablet that warmed his chilled fingers. Could empathy, engineered through accurate reconstruction, reshape how cities plan for disruption? The question glowed on his screen, unanswered but alive. Ethnobotanist Paloma Rivera in 2038 cultivated heirloom cabbages and turnips from seeds stored since the 1880s, germinating them in a greenhouse smelling of moist soil and leaf. She documented growth under varying light, mimicking gas lamp glow versus electric brightness. The produce tasted earthy, reminiscent of relief soups described in diaries. Paloma correlated the harvest with records of communal kitchens that fed thousands when the blizzard halted commerce, the ledger drift looming as the reason kitchens existed. She shared dishes with community groups, inviting reflections on mutual aid. Silence entered when tasters closed eyes, savoring history. Reverence guided the quiet. Did the vegetables carry the memory of frozen nights in their fibers? Paloma believed so, though she voiced it only once, softly. Time capsule curator Elias Morgan, in 2039, selected artifacts to represent the blizzard for a bicentennial vault. Copies of the ledger, a fragment of telegraph wire, vials of recreated scent, a digital chip with meteorological data. The preparation room smelled of archival foam and copper polish. He sealed each item in vacuum bags, the machine hissing, heat-sealing edges smooth. The unstoppable myth finally stayed outside the vault. Inside lay only evidence of vulnerability and resilience. Elias wrote a note on handmade rag paper, ink smelling of iron gall, inviting future readers to measure their own legends against the drift's truth. The capsule closed with a metallic click, and silence followed. Not suppression, but anticipatory awe. The sand remembers. Instruments hum. The hollow waits. Retired meteorologist Gloria Santos in 2040 hosted a rooftop stargazing session on the anniversary of the blizzard, the air tinged with night-blooming jasmine and distant salt. She aligned a telescope toward Arcturus, sharing Elena Gorova's findings about the star shining through the storm's brief aperture. Guests wrapped in blankets listened while she recited pressure drops and wind speeds, weaving the ledger drift as a refrain. The unstoppable city myth melted beneath celestial perspective. A single question floated from Gloria: can we honor both the star's serenity and the city's forced stillness without demanding resolution? No one answered aloud. Awe kept them quiet, the telescope's gears whispering as she adjusted focus. Finally, in a dim study overlooking Bryant Park, writer Jonah Keller in 2041 reread the 1888 ledger under a desk lamp, casting amber pools on the page, the paper smelling of starch and faint smoke. Snowflakes swirled outside, gentler now, tapping the window like cautious historians. Jonah traced the penciled 48, the number that once pinned an arrogant myth, and he listened to a city that, even awake, carried echoes of that long pause. The measured truth continued to ripple through time, through telegraph keys, soup ladles, sonar pings, ice sculptures, blockchain entries, lullaby research, and whispered sermons. The city had learned to embrace its moments of stillness, to let the drift stand as both warning and invitation. Perhaps the blizzard did not end when the thaw came. Perhaps its cold breath lingers wherever humility meets resilience. The mystery stays open, settled only in the soft hush between heartbeats where snow might fall again. Even as Jonah's lamp hummed faintly, another scholar across the Atlantic, climatologist Marguerite Vasseur in 2042, compared the 1888 storm to archives from Paris's 1870 siege winter. Her laboratory smelled of dry parchment and steamed milk. She traced atmospheric rivers on translucent overlays, fingers cool against the plastic, noting how the jet stream kinked over New York with the same elegance as a ribbon tied too tight. The data whispered a kinship between cities across time, each convinced of its own invincibility until snow taught humility. Marguerite emailed Jonah a gentle note, attaching wind charts that glimmered like thin ice under the monitor glow, wondering if shared vulnerability could carve a bridge between continents. His reply was a quiet thank you, a promise to weave her findings into the next edition of his chronicles. At the New York Historical Society in early 2004, conservator Emilio Renteria opened an unlabeled wooden crate padded with brittle straw. The air released a trace of linseed and damp wool. Inside lay a child's slate, its chalk inscription faint. School closed, March 12, 1888. Emilio held the slate under a raking light, watching the grooves sparkle like frost crystals. He scanned it, ensuring the texture translated into pixels, then compared the handwriting with attendance registers rescued from the ladies' home journal archives. The closure note aligned with reports that classrooms became soup kitchens, lending another measured thread to the tapestry of interrupted routines. Emilio stayed late, surrounding himself with silence so thick it felt like drifted snow, and he imagined the small hand that etched those words, a hand expecting the city to reopen by dawn. The slate's quiet admission joined the ledger's statement, two voices murmuring in tandem. In Albany's state archives, legislative historian Nadine Walker revisited 1888 testimonies from civic leaders who had pleaded for telegraph line burials. The pages smelled of inkstone and binding glue. She listened to wax cylinder transfers of their arguments, the voices crackling with static like distant wind through bare trees. Nadine noticed that a mother named Annika Dwyer described carrying warm bricks under her shawl to keep her children alive while the streetcar stalled at 23rd Street. The committee had dismissed her story as emotional exaggeration. Nadine highlighted the testimony in her modern report, overlaying temperature data that proved the chill could have numbed fingers within minutes. She placed the annotation in the legislature's digital docket, letting the evidence float up gently, determined that the once-ignored plea would finally settle among the official record. No one objected. The assembly hall simply held its breath, the wood-panelled walls absorbing the newfound compassion. Sometime in spring 2004, high school students at Brooklyn's Fort Hamilton campus rehearsed a docu-theatre performance titled White Silence. The auditorium smelled of fresh sawdust from the stage crew's painted props and the citrus cleaner used on folding chairs. Student actor Layla Cho carried a replica telegraph key, her fingers tracing the brass until they warmed. Their script drew from diaries newly digitized by the school's partnership with local archives, including a baker's note describing how yeast refused to rise until she tucked bowls near sleeping bodies. Drama teacher Marcel Green guided the students to speak softly, letting the words float like snowflakes. They staged a scene at the reservoir drift, projecting spectral light across gauzy fabric to evoke towering snow without replicating earlier exhibitions. Parents watched in near silence, the hush punctuated by gentle sniffles. When the lights dimmed, Layla whispered a question into the dark, whether the city's heartbeat slowed permanently that week, and the audience absorbed it like a lullaby. The sand remembers, instruments hum, the hollow waits. Rail historian Yuki Tanaka in 2043 unearthed maintenance journals from the 3rd Avenue elevated. The locker she opened exhaled a smell of oiled leather and cold iron. Among pages listing bolt replacements and timetable notes, she found a March 1888 entry describing crews wrapping rails with heated sandbags to free frozen switches. Yuki spread the ledger on a foam book cradle, noting how the sandbag temperatures were recorded in Fahrenheit and Celsius side by side, a bilingual effort to share instructions among immigrant workers. She calculated the heat loss over time, discovering that each bag cooled to ambient temperature within 6 minutes, far too quickly to keep the tracks mobile. This realization pulsed through her like a quiet alarm. She published an article in a transportation journal, concluding that the unstoppable myth had ignored the ingenuity and exhaustion of these crews. The piece received respectful responses, the academic community embracing the nuance with whispered admiration. In Red Hook, 2043's community mural project transformed a brick warehouse wall into a tapestry of snowbound images. Painter Mateo Ibarra layered pigments smelling of linseed and mineral spirits, depicting a horse car sunk to its axles, a telegraph custodian's brazier, and a mother shielding a lantern with her shawl. He embedded augmented reality markers within the paint, so passers-by could hold up phones and hear archival audio, the creak of ice, the muted clamour of stalled ferries, a historian's voice describing the measured drift. Local children pressed gloved hands to the wall, feeling the uneven bricks under fresh latex. The mural became an evening gathering point, ambient music, low and steady. Mateo declined corporate sponsorship, wanting the story to stay rooted in neighbourhood breath. Visitors spoke in hushed tones, as if the painted horses might startle. The wall glowed even on overcast days, a new shrine to the city's shared stillness. Aboard a Staten Island ferry in 2004, guide Camila Ortiz led twilight tours titled Frozen Harbor Reverie. The cabin smelled of salt and hot chocolate spiked with cloves. She pointed toward the Exchange Place skyline, describing rescue crews of 1888 dragging sleds across ice-thick Hudson waters. Camila unfolded a canvas reproduction of a nautical chart annotated with ice thickness readings recorded by the Revenue Cutter Service. Passengers traced the blue strokes, fingers tingling over the printed ridges. Camila's narration slowed, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever she mentioned bodies recovered near the slips. The legendary unstoppable harbour had once gone mute, she reminded them. As the ferry engines hummed, the tour group fell silent, listening to the waves, wondering how the city would sound if the river froze once more. No dramatic flourish concluded the journey, just a gentle invitation to breathe with the tide. At the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, archivist Brother Matteo in 2044 catalogued letters from parishioners who had slept on pews during the blizzard. The sacristy smelled of beeswax and old incense. One letter, penned in violet ink, described volunteers heating stones in the boiler room and sliding them under blankets to soothe frostbitten feet. Brother Matteo transcribed the text by hand, the nib whispering across cream paper. He attached a photograph of the nave crowded with shivering families, candles casting peach light on stone columns. The unstoppable myth dissolved in the image of a grand church turned dormitory. Brother Matteo planned a quiet exhibit, Sanctuary of Snow, using only the letters and a single warmed stone resting in a velvet-lined bowl. He hoped visitors would hover their palms above the stone and feel phantom warmth. The chapel, already hushed, seemed to exhale gratitude when the letters at last enjoyed gentle attention. In the same year, nutrition historian Alanis Peters brewed broth using an 1888 relief kitchen recipe she found in the Bowery Mission archives. The kitchen filled with steam-carrying scents of marrow, bay leaf, and barley. She measured salt precisely as written, 2 handfuls per cauldron, and documented how volunteers rotated stirring shifts every 20 minutes to avoid frostbite. Alanis tasted the broth, its savory depth lingering like low music. She offered samples at a small symposium, providing pamphlets that compared nutritional values of the blizzard diet to modern emergency rations. Attendees cradled paper cups, the warmth pooling through their gloves. Conversations remained soft, the reverence for anonymous soup ladles suffusing the room. Alanis's findings reminded everyone that the unstoppable city once relied not on commerce, but on communal pots simmering through the night, each swirl of steam a quiet defiance of the cold. At the Bronx Zoo Archives, wildlife curator Naseem Hart researched how the blizzard affected animal care. The storeroom smelled of cedar shavings and antique leather. He found teletype messages describing keepers sleeping beside enclosures, their breath mingling with the musty warmth of hay. One keeper wrote that wolves curled against the bars, seeking shared body heat from the humans. Naseem digitized the logs, marking the temperatures recorded inside each habitat. He noted how the reptile house held steady because kerosene heaters burned through the night, despite rationing. Naseem crafted an intimate audio tour, guiding visitors to imagine the zoo blanketed in silence, the animals listening to a city finally as quiet as the forest. He concluded with a gentle reminder that caretakers are sometimes the ones who shivered most. The tour ended beside a bronze wolf statue dusted with real snow, where visitors placed gloved hands on cold metal in silent solidarity. Meanwhile, 2045's urban designers tabled a competition to reimagine Bryant Park's winter illumination. Lighting artist Priya Bhatt proposed projecting thermal satellite data from March 1888 onto the park's ice rink, translating cold pockets into soft gradients of violet and indigo. Her studio smelled of soldered circuits and eucalyptus tea. She programmed LEDs to pulse at the tempo of hand-shoveled snow, slow, deliberate, respectful. When the installation debuted, skaters glided through moving light that seemed to breathe, and the park speakers played faint loops of wind recorded on wax cylinders. Priya included plaques listing precise snowfall measurements, reminding visitors they glided above the ghost of the drift. Children reached for the luminescent air, chattering briefly before settling into awe. Priya stood at the edge with her hands tucked in pockets, exhaling fog that mingled with the light haze. The park felt like a cathedral of cold memory, the unstoppable city bowing its head. In Queen's College's archives, linguist Farah Kovacs catalogued Yiddish, Italian, and German letters describing the blizzard's sounds. The reading room smelled of paper dust and apple tea. Farah mapped onomatopoeic words, Schlieren, Scricchiolio, Nerschen, capturing the scraping of sleds, the creak of frozen doors, the crunch under boots. She synthesized the linguistic data into a sound installation, layering whispered translations over the original language. The piece played in a dim room where visitors sat atop felt cushions, eyes closed. Farah included footnotes to meteorological reports correlating each sound with wind direction and snow composition. She noticed how each language treated silence differently, some as reverent pause, others as fearful gap. The unstoppable myth gave way to a polyphony of hushes. Visitors left notes pinned to a corkboard, describing which sounds settled their heartbeat. Farah smiled at the tender responses, the room's quiet humming with shared listening. In early 2004-06, genealogist teacher tandem Henry and Leila Gonzalez led Lower East Side families through a snow ancestry walk. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts from street vendors and faint river brine. They guided participants to tenement buildings where ancestors once shivered behind ice-frosted windows. Henry read census lines aloud, names, occupations, number of blankets per household, while Leila described the taste of bread rationed through charitable societies. The group paused at a synagogue stairwell, now repurposed, where relief committees had stacked coal lumps like black loaves. Leila passed around a small pouch of coal dust mixed with herbs, inviting inhalation of history. The unstoppable myth dissipated as families traced their fingerprints along stoop railings. No one shouted or posed for triumphant photos. Instead, they formed a circle near an old hydrant and stood quietly, listening to the street's softened murmur, acknowledging the weight of inherited winter. At NYU's Bobst Library, digital humanist Theo Mancini in 2046 coded a layered map showing block-by-block snow depths derived from Telegraph street reports. His workstation smelled faintly of peppermint gum and warmed circuitry. Each data point pulsed softly, revealing corridors where snow peaked above second-story windows. Theo overlaid infrastructure outages, gas lamps, telegraphs, water mains, highlighting how the city's glow peeled away like paint. He presented the map in a dim lab, the screen's blue light bathing visitors. They zoomed in to see neighborhoods shrink beneath white fields, the unstoppable grid blanked into negative space. Theo added an ambient soundtrack of glove leather creaking and distant bells. He looked up occasionally, checking if viewers kept their voices low. They did. The map had the solemnity of a tide chart, a reminder that snow can behave like water seeking level ground. The Brooklyn Botanic Garden in 2047 planted a commemorative grove of white spruce, each tagged with names of snow shovelers recorded in Department of Public Works ledgers. Horticulturist Jade Morales mixed soil with ash from wood stoves salvaged from 19th century row houses. The nursery smelled of damp peat and pine resin. Visitors donned wool mittens provided at the gate, the knit pattern replicating those in period photographs. Jade guided them to touch the sapling needles, sticky with resin, while reciting the hours crews labored, 14 at a stretch, pausing only when kerosene lamps ran low. The unstoppable myth softened amid the whisper of needles. Jade encouraged quiet reflection before the grove. She hung tiny brass bells to chime gently in winter breezes, each tinkle like a distant shovel scrape. Donations trickled in, not for spectacle but for maintenance, ensuring the trees would grow tall enough to sway above the park like a forest of memories. Music historian Ellie Warren in 2004-07 restored sheet music of parlor songs inspired by the blizzard. The pages smelled of old perfume and brittle paper. One composition entitled Snowbound Lullaby Featured dynamics marked pianissimo throughout, as if the composer were afraid to disturb sleeping children. Ellie recorded the piece on an 1880s square piano, its ivory keys cool, the wood resonant. She laid a wool shawl over the instrument's lid to dampen the tone, replicating how families in 1888 muffled sound to conserve warmth. The resulting audio moved like a slow breath. She released the recording with a booklet of historical context, pointing out the lyrics that praised not heroism but patience. Fans of vintage music shared the track quietly, some reporting that it eased their own winter anxieties. The unstoppable myth dissolved into a delicate melody that asked listeners to exhale slowly and trust the stillness. In 2048, documentary podcaster Malik Sori recorded an episode entirely in whispers, narrating the blizzard while walking through Columbia University's Low Library. The hallway smelled of polished marble and paperbacks. Malik's footsteps echoed softly on stone as he described students who 60 years earlier discovered Ransom's diary. He layered in snippets of their 20th century voices, then the creak of microfilm reels, finally the hush of modern archives. The episode encouraged listeners to lower their volume, to lean in. Malik detailed snowfall rates, ferry stoppages, and soup kitchen counts without raising his tone above a murmur. Listeners wrote to him saying they felt as if snowflakes brushed their ears. The unstoppable myth had no room inside such gentle storytelling. Quiet respect replaced adrenaline. Malik ended with a soft reminder to look up at the corniced ceiling, where warm lamplight pooled like melted snow, inviting a moment of gratitude. Hudson River Park's educational team in 24/8 introduced illuminated buoys that blinked in patterns mimicking telegram dashes and dots from March 1888 SOS messages. The river smelled of brine and algae. Each buoy emitted a soft chime when water lapped against it, turning the river into a glistening score. Interpretive signs detailed how long those telegraph keys lay silent before lines were restored. Nighttime joggers slowed, matching their breath to the rhythm. Park rangers explained that the unstoppable myth had once kept harbour officials from warning ships promptly. Now, the gently blinking buoys offered a perpetual reminder to listen when systems go quiet. Couples leaned against the railings, foreheads resting on knitted caps, absorbing the watery code as if it were a lullaby from the past. Midtown's Carnegie Hall hosted a 24/9 symposium where acoustician Dr. Noor Al-Hassan analysed how snowbanks changed the city's soundscape. The lobby smelled of aged velvet and fresh coffee. On stage, she played simulations showing how 1888's drifts absorbed carriage rattles, creating pockets of near silence between brownstones. She measured reverberation times, concluding that the city's ambient noise dropped by 18 decibels, a hush equivalent to closing a velvet curtain across the metropolis. Noor invited the audience to sit still as she dimmed the lights and projected a halo of white onto the ceiling. The hall echoed once, then rested. For a suspended heartbeat, even the HVAC seemed to pause. The unstoppable myth had insisted on perpetual clamour. Noor's data revealed the serenity that once blanketed the streets. Applause afterwards was gentle, more like the brush of mittens than thunder, as attendees respected the quiet they had momentarily shared. In 2049's Battery Park, a scent installation titled Frozen Harbour Memory diffused layers of kelp, coal, wet hemp rope, and orange peel. Olfactory artist Saffron Duval collaborated with harbour historians to replicate the aroma inhaled by ferrymen trapped between flows. Visitors walked through misted arches while listening to low-frequency recordings of ice grinding against hulls. Saffron included plaques citing specific dates. The ferries resumed, the unstoppable myth shrinking behind documented delay. Some guests closed their eyes, others cried softly, the salt air mingling with human salt. Saffron watched from a bench, notebook on knees, recording reactions in pencil. She noted that silence fell deepest near the final arch scented with burnt coffee beans, her homage to stewards like Elise Dubois. The installation left no souvenir except memory and a faint trace of sea spray clinging to scarves. Later that year, 2049's fashion historian Ren Zhu curated a textile exhibition, Threads of the Thaw, showcasing garments rescued from tenement trunks. The gallery smelled of cedar blocks and gentle detergent. Wren displayed a child's felt boots stuffed with newspaper, the headlines frozen in time with their talk of halted stock exchange trades. She paired each garment with ledger entries detailing warmth distribution efforts. Visitors were encouraged to slip their hands into replicas lined with coarse wool to feel the itch of emergency knitting circles. Wren's wall text whispered about seamstresses like Marta Velasquez whose needles flickered through the dark. The unstoppable myth was nowhere in sight. Instead, the gallery hummed with appreciation for calloused hands and fraying cuffs. When the exhibition closed nightly, Wren rested her forehead against the vitrines, thanking the clothing quietly for surviving long enough to teach. A 2050 initiative at the Schomburg Center invited poets to compose haiku based on archived letters from Black New Yorkers describing the blizzard's disruptions. The workshop room smelled of jasmine tea and old wood. Participants listened to recordings of Thomas Fortune's editorials, urging equitable snow clearing. They traced embossed maps showing which streets languished longest. Each haiku captured a sensory moment: ice sealing a church door, a brass band silenced mid-parade, coal smoke layered over peppermint candy. The unstoppable myth loosened as voices celebrated the resilience of communities left to dig themselves out. The printed haiku were displayed on translucent panels suspended from the ceiling like floating snowflakes. Visitors walked among them, reading in whispers, the words brushing their faces as softly as snowfall. Meanwhile, 2050's robotics lab at CUNY unveiled a prototype snow removal automaton inspired by designs sketched but never built after the 1888 disaster. The lab smelled of solder, ozone, and faint citrus cleaning spray. Engineer Petra Novak compared her robot's torque output with the horsepower recorded from draft teams in 1888. She programmed the machine to move deliberately, replicating the pace of exhausted crews, not to glorify speed, but to honor labor. When the robot demonstrated in the courtyard, it pushed foam blocks shaped like drift segments, sensors glowing a tranquil blue. Spectators remained calm, mindful of the original context. Petra explained how the unstoppable myth had once delayed investment in such technology, convincing officials that human determination sufficed. Now, innovation bowed gently to history. The robot's whir was soft, almost like a lullaby engine, and when it rested, the courtyard returned to quiet. In Harlem's Langston Hughes House, 2051's oral history salon gathered descendants of laundresses who toiled through the blizzard. The parlor smelled of lemon oil and strong tea. Storytellers described thawing snow in kettles to rinse garments, the water turning grey with soot. Historian Kendra Wallace cross-referenced their accounts with laundry invoices found in municipal ledgers, proving that rates doubled during the snowbound week. She shared photocopies of receipts, the ink feathered from moisture. Participants passed around a scarred washboard, fingertips grazing the grooves worn by generations. The unstoppable myth dissolved into the rhythmic scrape of soap and cloth. A hush settled after each testimony, a communal recognition that these quiet labors kept families alive. Kendra promised to publish the research, but first she let the stories rest in that modest space, like warm linens folded neatly on a shelf. Down in the subway archives in 2051, transit ethnographer Mia Sterling analyzed graffiti etched in carriages stranded during the blizzard's aftermath. The storage tunnel smelled of rust and ozone. She found initials, prayers, even a scratched tally of hours spent waiting for rescue. Mia traced the etchings onto vellum, comparing them with conductor logs noting when each car was freed. She discovered a small drawing of a clock where the hands pointed to midnight, captioned "City Asleep." The unstoppable myth cracked beneath that graffito's quiet assertion. Mia produced a podcast episode, recording within the tunnel to capture natural reverb. She whispered each inscription into the microphone, allowing long pauses between names, letting listeners imagine the chill metal beneath idle hands. The episode concluded with the sound of a distant train, a gentle reminder that motion eventually returned, but memory lingered. In 2052, The American Museum of Natural History curated a diorama showing the storm's impact on urban wildlife. Tweaked climate control vents released a cool breeze tinged with pine. Taxidermied sparrows huddled inside gutters. A fox trotted across a snowbank fabricated from silk fibre. Beside the display, curators posted data retrieved from 19th century ornithology notebooks noting species mortality. Audio tracks blended crisp footfalls with faint bird calls muffled by snow. The unstoppable myth faded beside evidence of wing beats slowed by frost. Children pressed their faces to the glass, breath fogging the surface, while docents whispered facts about how the blizzard redirected migration patterns for years. The room felt reverent, as if one wrong syllable might scare the fox into bolting from its frozen moment. On Coney Island's boardwalk in 2052, historian skater duo Mustafa and Sienna hosted moonlit roller sessions while narrating the blizzard's effect on seaside amusements. The ocean air smelled of brine and caramel corn. They glided slowly, describing lettered reports of snowdrifts swallowing bathhouse entrances. Mustafa read from a journal where a carousel organ fell silent as gears locked with ice. Sienna projected lantern slides onto a screen stretched between lampposts, the images trembling when wind brushed the fabric. Skaters traced figure eights, wheels whispering against the boards. The unstoppable myth seemed far away, replaced by images of closed fortune teller booths and quiet shooting galleries. Participants removed their helmets afterwards, hair damp with fog, and stood listening to waves, each crest like a sigh of relief from 1888's frozen shore. In a midtown high-rise in 2053, insurance actuary turned. Novelist Ria Francois wrote a calm thriller about auditors piecing together blizzard claims suppressed for decades. Her study smelled of sandalwood and printer ink. She lined the walls with photocopies of 1888 claim forms, each annotated with modern currency equivalents. Ria's protagonist calculated losses from collapsed brownstone roofs, the numbers adding up to a portrait of quiet devastation. She interspersed chapters with transcripts of council meetings arguing about premium hikes. Critics praised the book's soft tension, the way it let readers feel snow seeping through seams instead of chasing dramatic rescues. The unstoppable myth, long garrisoned by boosterish tales, surrendered to actuarial prose. Ria read excerpts at small bookstores, voice low, fingers resting on ledger replicas, as if to keep the numbers grounded. In 2053, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council sponsored a night of lantern walks titled Glow of 1888. Artists crafted lanterns shaped like telegraph keys, ferry wheels, and snow shovels. Beeswax candles scented with spruce flickered inside. Historian guides recounted measured wind speeds, death tolls, and relief timetables as the parade moved slowly down N Street. The unstoppable myth faded in the warm halo, replaced by an acknowledgement that pathfinding in darkness requires companions. Participants carried their lanterns carefully, shielding flames from breezes. When they reached a quiet square, they set the lanterns on the ground, forming a circle of golden domes. No one spoke. The only sound was candle crackle and distant traffic hushed by the hour. After a few minutes, they lifted the lanterns again, returning them to a gallery where melted wax would be catalogued alongside the evening's stories. At the 2054 New York Botanical Garden, olfactory scientist and historian duo Han and Mei Saito curated a greenhouse exhibit replicating the scent of snow-laden hemlocks described in Henry Abbey's poem about the blizzard. The air carried hints of mint, birch, and iron-rich soil. They planted mossy logs and misted the room to mimic the dampness that followed when frozen branches drooped. Visitors received small notebooks to record memories triggered by the fragrances. Han posted placards with snowfall measurements and tree damage data, connecting sensory experiences to historical fact. The unstoppable myth thawed under the realization that even poetry had once catalogued the city's pores. Guests left quietly, the scent clinging to scarves like a soft echo of forest within city bounds. Brownstone homeowner Elise Tan, a structural engineer, applied 1888 lessons to retrofit her stoop in 2054. During a community workshop, she demonstrated how hidden heating coils could prevent ice buildup without straining the grid. The air smelled of solder and hot stone. Elise's displayed reproduction blueprints of failed stoops from the blizzard, cracks traced in red pencil. She encouraged neighbors to touch the sandstone steps, now radiating mild warmth, while she recited data on injuries from the old drifts. The unstoppable myth had once insisted stoops needed no modification. Elise's design embraced adaptation. Workshop attendees nodded, their voices low, as they imagined ancestors chiseling steps free by lantern. She concluded by offering a quiet toast with cinnamon tea, honoring the masons who had carved the stoops first. In 2055, the Museum of the Moving Image screened a restored film reel shot a decade after the blizzard, depicting snow removal drills staged to prevent a repeat. The theatre smelled of popcorn and antique acetate. Silent actors marched with shovels, the film tinted pale blue. Curators overlaid captions with precise statistics on the 1888 cleanup timeline, revealing how little had actually changed in the drill despite grand claims. The unstoppable myth crumbled in front of an audience expecting heroics, but finding only careful practice. After the screening, the lights rose slowly. Viewers sat still, headphones piping in a reconstruction of 1888 wind to remind them that the drill was born of true fear. They filed out quietly, resisting chatter, letting the images settle like snow on coat shoulders. Medical students at Mount Sinai's simulator lab in 2055 reenacted trauma cases based on hospital ledgers from the blizzard. The room smelled of antiseptic and synthetic snow used for training. Each scenario detailed frostbite treatments using heated olive oil, respiratory support via steam tents, and amputation records noted in copperplate script. Instructor Dr. Sophia Weiss encouraged students to listen for the silent vitals, the absence of pulse in limbs numbed by cold. The unstoppable myth was replaced with a sober respect for caregivers who slept sitting up, boots still laced. After the simulation, students removed gloves slowly, the latex snapping softly. Sophia reminded them that the 1888 staff worked without modern diagnostics. Their only tool was observation sharpened by experience. The class dispersed, voices hushed, hearts mindful of the quiet heroism that once filled ward corridors. In Hudson Yards, 2056's Digital Art Collective projected a time-lapse onto a glass tower, showing a century of snowstorms layered with the 1888 blizzard as anchor. The lobby smelled of polished chrome and coffee. The projection began with a towering drift silhouette, then gradually introduced more recent storms, each annotated with snowfall totals and infrastructure impacts. Fast-moving commuters slowed to watch the city's outline vanish and reappear. The unstoppable myth flitted like a shadow before dissolving into data. An embedded soundscape featured soft chimes derived from telegraph pulses and the crunch of boots sampled from field recordings. People watched in silence, some resting palms against the glass to feel the cold radiance. The exhibit ran nightly, a modern lantern reminding the city to cherish both movement and pause. At the Brooklyn Navy Yard, 2056's maritime historians recovered a logbook from the sloop Margaret Rose that had been trapped in ice off Hunter's Point. The storage space smelled of tar and aged hemp. The captain's handwriting described crew members forming a chain to ferry bread loaves from shore, each person exhaling fog that turned to frost on scarves. The log noted precise barometer readings every hour despite the crisis. Historian Alison Shaw read the entries aloud during a small gathering, the words floats in the dimly lit workshop. She linked the numbers to modern tide gauge recalibrations, arguing that the 1888 data improved present-day storm modelling. The unstoppable myth found no girth amid such careful accounting. After the reading, attendees shared slices of sea biscuit glazed with molasses, chewing slowly, honouring the sailors whose patience held the ship safe. In 2057, the Tenement Museum offered an overnight program where guests slept beneath wool blankets similar to those issued during the blizzard. The apartment smelled of cabbage and soap. Educators dimmed gaslight reproductions until the room glowed amber. Each guest received a diary excerpt to read quietly, recounting how families took turns standing watch against roof collapses. The unstoppable myth faded between breaths as participants lay awake, listening to pre-recorded wind swirl through hidden speakers. Some whispered to one another, others lay silent, eyes closed, practicing the stillness ancestors were forced to accept. Morning coffee tasted smoky, and the guides reminded everyone to step softly on the creaking floorboards, preserving the illusion of 1888 dawn. During Central Park's 2057 Winter Walk, volunteers from the Sierra Club guided visitors to detect frost blooms on granite boulders. The air smelled of cedar and distant pretzel carts. Botanist Malika Foster carried a portable microscope, showing how ice crystals formed on lichen, their hexagons reflecting even muted light. She recounted park superintendent diaries describing teams chopping fallen branches that snapped like brittle candy, their arms jellied from work. Malika quoted specific snowfall depths measured near the old reservoir walls, letting the numbers drift into the cold air. The unstoppable myth melted as walkers realized the park once resembled an Arctic outpost. They moved slowly, the snow crunching softly under boots distributed at the tour start. When the group reached a quiet glade, Malika invited them to close their eyes and imagine the silence of 1888, when even the birds huddled wordlessly in evergreens. In 2058, the Pratt Institute's architecture students constructed a scale model showing how snow load redistributed across rooftops during the blizzard. The studio smelled of sawdust and laser-cut plywood. The model featured translucent resin snowcaps, each etched with weight calculations derived from 19th century engineering reports. As warm light filtered through, the resin glowed like sugar. Professor Ingrid Madsen asked students to run fingertips along the ridges, feeling how quickly strain accumulated near chimneys. The unstoppable myth of impervious buildings dissolved in the delicate model, where one misapplied force toppled entire sections. Students whispered adjustments to one another, conscious of how simply modelling the disaster demanded respectful quiet. At the critique, they presented their findings in gentle tones, acknowledging the carpenters and masons whose work bore the brunt of winter's weight. On Roosevelt Island, 2058's Historical Society hosted a lantern-lit reading of asylum and hospital logs from March 1888. The chapel smelled of wax and starch. Volunteers recited entries describing how staff kept ice from sealing ward windows, melting snow for hygiene, and moving patients away from drafty corridors. Each log included precise times for turning mattresses to prevent dampness. The unstoppable myth could not exist in this context. Institutional caretakers worked in near darkness, whispering to avoid startling the sick. After the readings, attendees lit floating candles on the East River, the flames bobbing like tiny souls until the tide carried them out. Nobody spoke above a murmur, respecting the lives chronicled in copperplate. In 2059, fashioning a new medium, glassblower Antoine Melgray sculpted snow globes capturing scenes from the blizzard, a telegraph office, a stalled omnibus, a snow-walled alley. His studio smelled of molten glass and singed wood. He infused the water with microscopic glass flakes cut to mimic wet snow, falling slowly when shaken. Each base concealed a brass plaque engraved with dates and meteorological figures. Buyers were encouraged to swirl the globes only once a day, treating the movement as a ritual rather than a novelty. The unstoppable myth found itself encased, slowed, refracted through glass thickness. Antoine signed each piece quietly, his breath fogging the shell as it cooled. The globes sold to libraries, museums, and a few private collectors who promised to keep them near bookshelves, not mantelpieces, so the stories stayed close to words. During the bicentennial of the United States Weather Bureau's founding in 2059, speakers in Washington, D.C., revisited the 1888 blizzard as pivotal. The conference hall smelled of polished mahogany and brewed tea. Meteorologist archivist duo Harper Boone and Isaac Lynn unveiled a time-synced presentation merging telegraph logs with modern satellite reanalysis. They demonstrated how the signal delay compounded with civic pride to worsen the crisis. The unstoppable myth shrank before cascading charts, yet Harper's tone remained soothing. guiding the audience like a bedtime story anchored by numbers. Attendees left with digital copies of the data, some clutching the files like treasured quilts. Quiet conversations drifted through the hallways, murmured plans to update emergency protocols shaped by history's patient lessons. In 2060, the Staten Island Museum launched a tactile map for visitors with low vision, the raised contours depicting snow depth across the borough during the blizzard. The exhibit room smelled of linen and freshly printed acrylic. Fingers traced ridges representing drifts along the North Shore, while embedded audio recounted recorded wind directions. Facilitator Amina Clark encouraged visitors to slow their hands, letting the map's topography tell the story through touch. The unstoppable myth dissolved under fingertips, recognizing just how high the snow rose and where roads vanished. The map's legend included braille translations of key metrics: barometric pressure drops, temperature cliffs, ferry cancellations. Participants lingered, exploring the entire board twice, some blinking away tears. Amina tightened the blankets draped over chairs, ensuring warmth matched the narrative's gentle cadence. At Queen's Museum's panorama of the city of New York, 2060's upgrade introduced a snowfall projection from 1888 cascading across miniature neighborhoods. The temperature in the gallery subtly dropped, scented with a hint of peppermint. Visitors watched the model city vanish beneath simulated drifts, streets glowing faintly from embedded lights indicating emergency shelters. The unstoppable myth seemed like a ghost as the panorama showed the grid going white and still. Children pressed noses against plexiglass, whispering questions. Guides responded with soft explanations about coal shortages and communal efforts. After the projection, the lights warmed the miniature city again, but the sense of hush lingered. The city in miniature had taught its full-scale counterpart how fragile momentum could be. On the 172nd anniversary of the storm in 2060, sound healer and historian duo Keiko Mizuno and Julian Ford hosted a resonant circle beneath the Manhattan Bridge. The concrete smelled of rain and river. They tuned crystal bowls to frequencies derived from barometric readings, each tone correlating with pressure levels recorded during the blizzard. Participants reclined on blankets, eyes closed, the vibrations traveling through ribs and into the pavement. The unstoppable myth melted beneath harmonics that evoked wind at 50 miles per hour, then 40, then 20. Between tones, Keiko recited calm lines from diaries describing how neighbors shared silence to conserve breath and hope. The session ended with a gentle question: could listeners carry this attuned stillness back into rush hour life? Participants rose slowly, their footsteps light, voices hushed as if emerging from snowfall. Educational technologist Gerald Pineda in 2061 launched an augmented reality app that overlaid historic snowdrifts on modern streets via headset. The office smelled of plastic and faint citrus. Gerald coded the app to display not just height but density, using shades of blue to represent compaction noted in sanitation logs. Users could hear the muffled ambient sound as they approached a corner once buried under 15 feet of snow. The unstoppable myth collapsed under the immersive weight. Commuters tried the app during lunch, returning to work with a new respect for cleared sidewalks. Gerald included prompts encouraging quiet reflection. Pause, imagine the hush. Listen for the absence of wheels. Feedback poured in expressing gratitude for the gentle reminders. The app quickly became part of school field trips, a tactile lesson in humility. The New York Philharmonic's 2006 program featured a composition where instrument sections fell silent one by one, mirroring the progressive power outages of 1888. The concert hall smelled of polished wood and faint perfume. Composer Alma Ruiz instructed strings to taper off as if their bows were freezing. Horns followed, then woodwinds, until only soft percussion remained, echoing the distant clack of shovels. Interspersed were spoken excerpts from municipal reports read in calming voices. The unstoppable myth found no presence in a hall where silence became the climax. When the final drumbeat faded, the audience waited in stillness before applauding, their claps gentle as snow landing on wool sleeves. In 2062, the New York Public Library's Rose Main Reading Room installed a light sculpture that dimmed in response to archival narratives about the blizzard. The chandelier smelled faintly of warm metal. As visitors listened through provided headphones, the lights lowered to mimic the murky midday gloom of March 12, 1888. Quotations from letter writers scrolled along the ceiling beams, each line accompanied by data points, snowfall totals, rescue counts, hours of stillness. The unstoppable myth drifted away under the golden dusk. Readers at tables continued turning pages, trusting the architecture even as it briefly reenacted vulnerability. When the narrative concluded, the lights brightened slowly, like dawn creeping over snowbanks. The experience left patrons speaking softly, the reverberant hall echoing with respect. Bronx chef historian Solomon Ortiz, in 2006 curated a tasting of preserved foods from cellars inventoried after the blizzard. Pickled beans, salted trout, dried apples. The kitchen smelled of vinegar and smoke. He plated each morsel on slate tiles dusted with powdered sugar to resemble snow. Diners savored the concentrated flavors, nodding as Solomon recounted how these stores sustained families when markets closed. Ledgers had recorded each jar, each barrel, a testament to quiet foresight. The unstoppable myth surrendered to jars labeled with careful hands. After dessert, a molasses pudding steamed over a gentle flame. The room sat in contemplative silence. Solomon suggested guests write notes of gratitude to ancestors who hoarded food against ridicule. The letters would join the mission's archives, another layer of gentle acknowledgement. At Wave Hill in 2006-03, horticultural therapist June Park guided visitors through a meditation among winter-blooming witch hazels, their petals curling like saffron threads. The air smelled of loam and citrus. She recited excerpts from 1888 diaries praising these hardy blossoms for perfuming frozen air. June linked each plant to weather station records, showing how even a few degrees mattered to petals unfurling against odds. The unstoppable myth was replaced by appreciation for botanical resilience. Participants stood in silence, breathing the sweet scent, each exhale visible in the cold. June asked them to cut the blooms with gloved hands, absorbing the warmth of life pushing through winter. Later, they penned reflections in a communal journal, handwriting neat from the calm. Queen's Theatre in the Park staged a shadow play in 26-3, using cut paper silhouettes depicting scenes from the blizzard. The backstage smelled of cardstock and paste. Puppeteers manipulated the figures behind parchment screens, projecting flickering lamplight. Narrators read from municipal council records describing debates over burying telegraph lines. The unstoppable myth flickered like a ghost, overshadowed by the tender shadows of people coordinating relief. Children in the audience leaned forward, mouths parted yet quiet, captivated by the rustle of paper. After the performance, the puppeteers invited them to try the silhouettes, teaching them to move slowly, to respect the story's pace. The stage darkened without fanfare, leaving only the scent of burnt Vaseline from the lamps and the echo of gentle clapping. A 2006-04 exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian explored how Lenape descendants interpreted the blizzard within broader narratives of seasonal balance. The gallery smelled of cedar smoke and sage. Curator WWII, two eagles displayed wampum belts alongside meteorological graphs, explaining how oral histories described winter spirits reclaiming the island from relentless industry. The unstoppable myth dissolved under teachings about harmony and recalibration. WWII led soft-spoken tours, inviting visitors to touch replica beadwork while listening to recordings of snow crunching in forest paths. The exhibition ended with a bench facing a projection of snowfall over Manhattan, accompanied by a drum heartbeat slow as sleeping breath. Visitors sat, some closing eyes, others whispering reflections about how stillness nurtures wisdom. In 2006-04, a new lens was turned. Astrophotographer Ravi Kashyap captured time-lapse images showing Manhattan's skyline under softly falling snow while overlaying star charts from March 1888. His rooftop observatory smelled of cold metal and cocoa. He synchronized each building's outline, with constellations visible during the blizzard's calm intervals. The unstoppable myth gave way to a conversation between skyline lights and timeless stars. Ravi exhibited the work in a dark gallery, the images glowing as if backlit by moonlight. Ambient sound included the gentle whir of telescope gears, merging with wind recorded from the East River Promenade. Visitors stood quietly, letting eyes adjust, discovering how the city once mirrored the sky's hesitant twinkle. By 2065, scholars assembled a timeline of quiet at the New York Transit Museum. A ribbon of light seamed across the ceiling. Each segment marked hours when specific lines fell silent during the blizzard, annotated with passenger counts and shelter statistics. The hall smelled of oil and polished brass. Visitors walked beneath the timeline, the light dimming as they reached critical hours. The unstoppable myth could not survive beneath a ceiling that visibly darkened in empathy. Audio guides whispered context, the exact minute motormen abandoned cars, the weight of snow on elevated rails. Families held hands, watching the light fade and brighten. In the gift shop, they purchased nothing flashy. Instead, they left with pamphlets printed on soft paper, edges deckled like snowdrifts. Long after midnight in early 2065, rooftop beekeeper Maya Leduc tended hives insulated against frost. The air smelled of honey and cedar shavings. She read aloud from apiarist notes of 1888, detailing how keepers wrapped hives with burlap and fed sugar candy to bees unable to forage. Maya weighed her own hive's honey stores, comparing them to ledger entries from the past. The unstoppable myth felt absurd next to bees sleeping through winter. She whispered thanks to the colony, promising to watch their temperature monitors. The city below hummed faintly, yet up on the roof, the only sound was the soft rustle of wings shifting in dreams, a reminder that even the smallest urban residents experienced the blizzard's hush. And so the murmurs continued, layered like snow upon snow. The Great Blizzard of 1888 did not freeze solely a single week. It froze moments that kept thawing into future hands, into ledgers, lantern walks, aromatic rooms, soundscapes, and gentle questions. Each retelling added another breath to the collective memory, asking New York to rest for a heartbeat, to remember that even the loudest city once listened to